So welcome to episode number 9 of Coronavirus Conversations. Today is Tuesday, September 8th. And joining me today is my usual partner in crime, Dr. Josh Williamson from the Gable Health Center. Hi, Josh.
Hey, Adam, how are you?
I'm doing all right, hanging in there. We're week number 4 now of teaching already. So it seems to be going okay so far. It's weird wearing the mask. We'll be talking a lot about masks today with our guest. We have a guest with us today, and I'd like to thank Dr. Brian Buerke. So he's an associate professor of physics here at Albright College. And so Josh and I thought it'd be great to have him on to talk a little bit about the physics of the virus and of the transmission of the virus with a focus on masks and things of that nature. So thanks for joining us, Brian.
My pleasure, Adam. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So I wanted to start maybe if you could give us a little bit of your background. What did you do prior to Albright? What brought you to Albright, and maybe a little bit about your courses that you teach here.
Mm-hmm. So I've been at Albright since 2000. This is my start of my 21st year, I guess. I am chair of the department. The classes I teach are pretty broadly based. I do everything from first year seminar and introductory lab sciences for non-science majors, all the way up to the most advanced physics classes we teach here for the physics majors. So I like it all. I like teaching every level. That's one of the reasons why I really wanted to come to a place like Albright, because it gives you a chance to really teach a wide range of areas, and I really enjoy doing that. My background is officially considered atomic, molecular, and optical physics. I got my Ph.D. at the University of Rochester in quantum optics and high-intensity laser physics. So one of the connections that this has with our conversation today is, a lot of the tests on particulate matter that come out of the mouth and the effect that masks have on them are done using optical methods, particularly lasers, to see either where the particles are or how fast they're moving. So, I do have a relevant background for understanding some of the papers and some of the results we'll be talking about.
Cool. Sorry, I have to ask, have you ever had a student come up and joke with you from Austin Powers about the laser? Have you ever do that?
No
one. First one? The freaking laser.
To be honest, it would probably be lost on me because I've never seen any of the Austin Power movies. Josh,
help me out. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Definitely.
Woo, okay.
Laser.
Laser. All right.
I'll just note that the laser I worked on was probably arguably the most powerful and intense laser known at the time. Oops, I guess we lost my stuff here. It actually was a pretty important advance. The people who developed it before I arrived at the University of Rochester won the Nobel Prize in physics.
Oh, wow.
Developing that laser. So, anyone else can put lasers in quotes, but I really had a laser without quotes.
He had the laser.
Yeah, that's right.
I had the laser.
All right, nice. Awesome. That sounds really interesting. So, Brian, you're here to talk about say like droplet transmission, aspects of transmission, the physics of that process. Where do you want to begin? Do you have any thoughts? So where do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I thought we could first talk a little bit about the issue of droplets versus aerosols, just to distinguish between those and why that matters in terms of COVID-19 transmission, and what impact that has on the decisions various medical bodies like the CDC or WHO have made in terms of the recommendations they've made. So, the droplets that come out of our mouth, especially when we're speaking loudly or singing, are fairly large. They are actually, droplets of, I guess, spit, we could say, or saliva. And they're on the order usually of 10 microns or larger. So just to put that in perspective, I think 10 microns is maybe as thin as the thinnest human hair. So they're that size and larger. COVID-19, of course, is a respiratory disease. It's spread by people breathing in respiratory fluids from sick people, and saliva is a major contributor to that. It has been long thought that the main cause of spread is those large droplets of saliva that come out of people's mouths and then spread and get sucked in. Now, the reason why that's important is because large droplets like that fall very quickly. They are basically like a ball that you would throw. Gravity just pulls them right down. And they're not going to go very far because they hit the ground pretty quickly. So when you think about the usual standard for social distancing, the 6 feet standard is really based on the idea that the spread of COVID-19 comes mainly from those larger droplets. They're just going to fall down. They might only go 2 or 3 or 4 feet and fall on the ground. And so if you're 6 feet away, you don't really have to worry about breathing them in.
So Brian, just a quick question. Is that distance primarily originated from normal speaking? So I would imagine if someone is, say, yelling, coughing, sneezing, those large droplets could probably go much further, right?
The larger ones would go a little bit farther, but not necessarily a lot farther. I mean, they really are. I mean, obviously the faster you push them out, the farther they're going to go. So if you're coughing, that's going to be more violent, or if you're singing, that's going to be a lot more energy than if you're just speaking. But I mean, the analogy I gave to you when we were talking about this before is it's more or less like spitting. If you are spitting saliva out, that's probably similar to coughing or singing really loudly. In general, if we spit, it might only go 3 or 4 feet. On the other hand, if I were standing in front of someone who's spitting, I wouldn't feel very comfortable only being 6 feet away from them. I might want to be 8 or 10, just because there will be some that go a little bit farther. So, I mean, I think 6 feet is a pretty good standard to use if the main transmission is coming from those larger droplets. The issue is that we, of course, produce droplets of all different sizes, including ones that are less than 10 microns across. And the reason why that's important is that those smaller droplets don't fall as fast by gravity because they're being pushed up and sort of buoyed up by the air around them. And then when you get to even smaller, which are aerosols, that's less than 1 micron across, they will actually float through the air. They're suspended. And so they keep traveling, and they can go very, very far because it takes them a long time before they would settle. So, the 6 feet standard is a good one if the larger instantly falling droplets are the main cause, but if some of the smaller ones are a significant contributor, then the 6 feet would not be enough.
And I'm trying to look up here for reference. I don't have this off the top of my head, but the size of a COVID virion. Okay, so a average coronavirus virion, which is another word for the virus particle. So the physical particle is approximately 50 to 200 nanometers in diameter. So 200 nanometers would be, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be 0.2 micron, is that correct? 200 nanometers?
Something like that, yeah.
I believe that's 0.2, right? So we're talking about basically tenfold.
Nanometers, 1 down is 1,000 down from a micron, that's right.
Yeah.
So,
right, so if we're talking about a droplet that's 1 micron across, so the very, very small ones, basic aerosols, you could fit many, many, many viruses on that particle because the virus is about tenfold smaller than even that small droplet.
Oh, that's right. So the aerosols have no trouble packing in lots of virus.
Yeah.
The thing to keep in mind, though, is that those larger droplets of 10 microns or larger have a much, much bigger volume. So if you think back to maybe geometry in high school, no, that's okay. The volume, this is the physics and math coming in. The volume of a sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. So the volume of a droplet is going to increase as the cube of the size of that droplet. So if you have a 10 micron droplet, that would hold 1,000 times more volume and 1,000 times more virus than a 1 micron aerosol. So it's not that the aerosols don't pack a lot of virus, they do. but the larger droplets just have so much more volume that they would have a lot more virus in them just because they're so much larger. So, I mean, that is why the CDC and the WHO have sort of focused on those fast falling larger droplets, because they pack a huge viral punch, if you will,
Right.
because of their volume.
Do you have any indication, Brian, on, because I didn't have a chance to look this up, you know, like the average breath, right? The average, you know, sort of interaction. I'm wondering how many of these droplets we're talking about. Have you come across any number of, like, say, like the number of droplets per, you know, second or per minute?
Not offhand. We could probably find out just by looking at some of the studies that have been done at looking at, you know, the droplets coming out of the mouth.
I was just curious. Like I said, I don't know that information, but
I will say the studies that we've seen with lasers show clear evidence of saliva particles that come out and are traveling very, very far. They're not falling, or the ones that are being seen in the experiments are not like falling in half a second. They're traveling for seconds or tens of seconds. So those are clearly the smaller ones, maybe in that 1 to 5 micron range. They may not be true aerosols, but they're small enough that they are suspended for a while. You know, I guess we would call them droplet nuclei in a lot of cases. So those are larger droplets that have evaporated somewhat and gotten smaller, but they can be suspended for a while. So they end up traveling more than the 6 feet. And there's a good chance that they're actually a major contributor to the spread of COVID-19 as opposed to the ones that just fall down immediately.
Ryan, do they diffuse quickly then, these aerosols? I mean, do they kind of push away from each other, or is it more directional? Do we know?
Which ones are you talking about, Josh?
Just in natural breath that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, when we breathe out, it creates a cloud of, you know, it looks like fog, I guess. So similar, yeah, I mean, we all experience that in the wintertime when we breathe out. So I think the droplets are pretty much doing the same thing. There's a lot of turbulence. It's a big cloud of stuff. But you also notice that cloud that you breathe out doesn't drop down immediately. So those are smaller droplets that can be suspended for a while. And so, you know, I think the mouth, when we are speaking, we're producing, we're producing a wide variety of them, but we're probably producing a good range in all sizes, both small aerosols and the larger ones at the same time. I know that when I'm speaking in class, I've oftentimes seen spittle shoot out. Hopefully students are not too close to me. I'm a pretty energetic speaker in class. So, you know, I know that I'm producing a fair amount when I speak in class, and I'm sure a lot of other people are as well. Depends on how much you enunciate and so on.
so do you want to talk a little bit about like face coverings and their utility?
Sure. Well, I did want to note, you know, we are going to talk about a mask study a little bit later, but another mask study that I was looking at, you know, was also looking at how far these particles go without masks. And, you know, they did find that they easily reach 9 feet. They easily reach 12 feet. It takes maybe a minute for them to get 12 feet away, and they are sort of becoming more dilute. But it's worth keeping in mind that a lot of these particles we're talking about that we're going to be masking are actually traveling a lot more than the 6 feet. They're going at least a dozen feet and are potentially, you know, breathable by healthy people. So that's definitely an issue. As far as the masks, I guess what I would say, I think there's been a lot of confusion and maybe a bit of mythology out there about masks, maybe partly based on how, you know, they get used in other contexts. But I think masks have two main purposes. There's a blocking purpose. So the idea is if you have the mask over your face, some of the particles that you're breathing out are going to be either caught in the mask or they're going to be bounced back, so they don't make it through the mask. So that's sort of the blocking purpose that the mask has. And then the second purpose that the mask has is to sort of reduce the speed that the particles have when they come out. So some of the particles are going to make it through, but they're not going to be traveling as fast as they would if you didn't have a mask. And so, you know, both of those effects are important, but they play a role in different contexts. So for example, Let's talk about the issue of wearing a mask if you're sick versus wearing a mask if you're healthy. A lot of the guidance that has been given has focused on, wear a mask, especially if you're sick, because by wearing a mask, you can protect others. The idea behind that is that obviously the mask, when it's covering your face, is keeping those saliva particles near your face so they're not traveling to other people. So they're blocking, the mask is blocking. But it's also slowing them down so they don't travel as far. So that's an additional effect that it has in protecting others around you. Does that mean that people who are healthy shouldn't wear a mask? No, not at all, because masks help them as well through that blocking effect. So if you have the mask on, particles that hit your mask, a lot of them will be blocked and will not make it through, and that's protecting you. Now, the issue of slowing them down, that part of it, of the masks working, does not help you if you're healthy, because the mask is right up to your face. If they happen to make it through, it doesn't matter whether they're moving slowly or quickly, you're going to breathe them in. So there are two mechanisms that the masks have that are helpful. Both of them sort of are important if you are sick and wearing a mask. That makes mask wearing more effective if you're sick. But there's also the side of it that works if you're healthy and trying to protect yourself. So I think it is true that masks play a bigger role in protecting, in preventing sick people from making healthy people sick, but it also plays a role in helping all of us stay healthy if we're already healthy.
Right. You make a good point, Brian, about the acquisition part of it, because this is something that, we've known about in the virology and immunology community for a long time, that sometimes the initial dose of infection really matters a lot. And so there's mouse studies and human studies where like a smaller initial dose often leads to either no symptoms or, less severe disease. So sometimes that initial dose can matter. And if you're reducing that initial dose, even if you do get infected, it's quite possible that your symptoms would be less severe.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Anytime you can, cut down the number of particles that you're breathing in, you're going to be better off, either in terms of not getting sick at all because it doesn't go above that threshold that you need for your immune system not to be able to fight it, or as you say, just less of an impact in terms of when you do get sick. So that blocking aspect of masks is definitely important, and it helps both the healthy and the sick. I just want to note, this has been part of what I call mythology of masks, because there's been a lot of emphasis that it really is better, it's primarily for sick people to keep from making other people ill. And if you look at the posters that we have here in the science building at Albright, the very top line says, how to keep from getting sick. And it has all the usual stuff like, wash your hands, socially distance. That top line doesn't say anything about wearing a mask. It's almost implying that, there's no use in wearing a mask if you're healthy. Later down, if it says, if you're sick, then it says wear a mask. So the poster itself, which is based on CDC guidelines, is sort of emphasizing, in my opinion, the wrong emphasis. It is true that masks work better if you're sick and they help protect others, but they will also protect you if you're healthy. And that it really has not been emphasized enough. And it's that both of those things are important is clear from the physics of it, I would say.
I have a cool poster over here, Brian. I want to run down and grab it and show everybody. It's a little bit different with the mask, which maybe I'll do that in between here at some point. I wanted to add, because Brian, I thought that was excellent. Recently in India, they were having outbreaks from the contact tracers, people that were going out to let contacts know and identify, and they were getting sick. They added face shields to their protection. I don't know if you guys saw that article. It was just in the last couple of weeks, because of course India is really struggling right now. But the addition of the face shield along with the mask really dropped the numbers of those contact tracers, even while the cases in India continue to skyrocket. Again, more towards the idea of that protecting the healthy person with that kind of an extra layer. Of course, not an N95, but an extra layer of protection from that direct inoculum, I guess.
Sure, and I mean, the reason why the masks would really, in that case, help be more effective is masks, obviously, their only purpose is to block. They keep particles from going through. And that's really the only way to protect healthy people, as opposed to masks on sick people that can also slow down the virus and keep it from going as far. So yeah, I mean, I would certainly believe that having masks or having the shields in addition to masks would definitely help the workers from getting sick. Should definitely help.
And a shield, Brian, a shield only, do you suppose, based on your knowledge, the larger droplets would presumably get splattered on the inside of the shield, right? But would the smaller ones potentially sort of flow out under and around?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, you know, at least the shields that I've seen by themselves are probably not the best approach.
Okay.
Just because there is so much left open. I mean, we've seen in the various studies, and you know, we can talk about it, something like a bandana does some of the job, but it's not great compared with a lot of masks. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is because you know, you just have that triangle coming down maybe a little below your chin, but you have all that space open. And so, you know, when the particles hit the bandana, they don't necessarily go through, but they are going to recoil, and they're going to come out the sides and then, you know, go into the air as well. You don't have to worry so much about people in front of you. They're still going to do a good job of blocking that, but definitely it can spread around you, and then if people are nearby, it would be a risk, greater risk. Then if with a mask that actually, you know, covers your chin fairly securely and over your nose pretty securely.
I like the point you brought up, Brian, about the emphasis needs to be on the right kind of concept. Another thing that I've had a problem with in terms of emphasis, and I agree with you completely, the other part of it is that a lot of data in the last month or so has shown that there's most of the transmission is likely occurring prior to someone getting symptoms, okay? So by the time you show up with your cough or you've lost your sense of smell, or you don't feel well, or you vomited, whatever symptom you have, you're likely, so they've done some studies where they've looked at the amount of virus in those people, and the peak of virus levels is actually occurring just prior to the symptom onset for most people. And so, you know, the more virus is correlated with more chance of spreading. And so there's a lot of pre-symptomatic transmission that could potentially happen. Whereas SARS-1, the reason that SARS-1 probably died out so readily is that it primarily spread once somebody was symptomatic. So the most spread occurred after symptom onset, whereas this, it really is, you know, I kind of like laugh because it's like, can we catch a break here, people, right? It's like, you know, like everything seems to be working against us with this pandemic, but unfortunately this particular virus seems to spread and transmit probably more pre-symptomatic. So again, wear the mask all the time. You go to the store, you go wherever, because if you start showing symptoms 2 days from now, you might be spreading right now currently. And so this emphasis on if you're sick, well, if you're sick means you're showing symptoms, it probably means that you've already had your prime window of spreading already occur, and you're sort of on the tail end. So anyway, I just think that it's also a little bit of the wrong emphasis on that.
Sure. You know, there have been a lot of interesting studies coming out of China. Obviously, they were hit first, and they did a really good job of controlling it and keeping it pretty much in Wuhan. But you know, they studied, among other things, transmission in the home, right? So most people, when they're at the home, stay at home or lockdown or whatever, would not be wearing masks in their house. And they studied the effects of mask wearing in your house, which you might think, well, it's kind of irrelevant because you're going to be so close to all your family members anyway. You know, how could a mask really do much? But they found that masks dramatically cut transmission even in households from one family member to another, but only if the people were wearing the masks during that pre-symptomatic phase. So during that 2 to 3 days when they were contagious but not showing symptoms, you know, the chance of passing it to a family member was greatly reduced if you wore a mask when you were at home. So, I mean, that really, I mean, when you think about houses, they're usually not very well ventilated. They're small rooms. You're at close quarters with family members. If masks work really well in that environment, they're going to be great everywhere. And I think that was really a revelation that masks were as effective as they are. But it's exactly because of what you said, that the prime time for transmission is that pre-symptomatic period.
Yeah. Cool.
Brian, I want to share this real quick.
Oh, you got the poster.
So prevention, let's see.
You guys seeing well?
Chance of,
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to comprehend it there, Josh. I'm trying to,
Yeah.
I can see
So
the
at
poster, but I'm trying to read it.
Yeah, so at the top, it's, you know, you have very high risk when nobody's wearing masks.
Mhm.
You have high risk when just one person's wearing the mask, the healthy person. A little bit less if the sick person's wearing the mask. Lower risk if both people are wearing a mask. Very low if you stay 6 feet apart and you're wearing a mask. And if everybody just stays home, you basically can't get it.
Well, and so, I mean, this is an interesting point, because you go down to the virtually none, and I mean, that suggests that, you know, well, if you stay at home and if no one else lives with you.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
They were by themselves. They didn't have their family members with them.
that's a completely unrealistic situation, because, I mean, we went home from the spring semester mid-March, right? And so I was home for 2 weeks, and I came down with the virus. So I fell into that category of being home, right? So how did I get it? Well, I probably got it from my wife, who was an essential worker. So she was going to work every day, and she at Sam's Club, and you know, this was before anyone was wearing masks, and then she probably caught it from some customers, brought it home to me. But I mean, there's a lot of transmission at home, because in reality, even though a lot of people do stay home, you can't stay home constantly all the time.
Right.
And you know, because you have to get food, you have to get supplies and so on. Someone from your household usually has to go out and get stuff. So I think there is a lot of at-home transmission. So you really have to be careful about the messaging there. On the whole, I don't disagree with that particular chart, but the one that we have here in the science building, like I said, had that different messaging that I think came from the CDC, that could have been maybe improved a bit.
I mean, it's a very nice looking sign.
It is very nice looking. I was very impressed with it.
Right, but your eye goes to the top, and it almost becomes mentally like a rank order list.
Yeah.
And so I get your point. Yeah.
I'd also like to point out the 6 feet thing. I mean, it's a strange thing where social distancing obviously is better than nothing. And 6 feet is better than 3 feet. But if you're not wearing masks, 6 feet is probably not enough. But then on the other hand, if you are wearing masks, it's an open question whether social distancing is even needed at that point. And the reason I say that is this: when they've looked at the studies of particles actually making it through the masks, as I said, they are slowed down quite a bit, so they don't travel as far. And so just an ordinary, you know, mask of the kind that we're getting here at Albright. I'm not sure where that's coming from.
It's coming from Josh. Way to go.
Anyway, just a simple mask like this reduces the speed of the particles enough that they only go a few inches from the mask. So you're talking about the difference of traveling 12 feet without a mask versus only a few inches with the mask. And when you think about, you know, the particles only going a few inches away from you, you know, unless you're in the habit of hugging and kissing everyone you meet, you don't really need to worry about 6 feet of social distance if everyone wears a mask, because it's reducing the spread of the virus by a lot more than that. So, you know, I don't know that the social distancing, once people have masks on, I don't know if the social distancing emphasis has really been as accurate as it could be, because masks really, in my mind, are, 95% of the game. And I mean, there are other things that you want to wash your hands, obviously, and everything, but
Yeah.
the masks are really, really the game changer in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. Josh, so we have about 15 minutes left. So did you want to ask any other questions, Josh, before we go through that paper that came out?
I guess that I do have a question for Brian because, in medicine, it's frustrating that masks have been around for, 100 years at least. But here we are trying to answer the very most basic questions about illnesses that we've battled throughout history. So, I'm frustrated that medicine is so far behind in this, and I'm wondering, is that something that other areas, your area has done a lot of work on and just hasn't kind of made the jump over to the clinical side, or is this everybody's still in the dark because it's amazing, we mentioned the lasers, look at where we are with this stuff,
Sure.
and then we still don't understand droplet precautions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of not knowing what's going on and being clueless and then making really kind of poor decisions, when you are in this position of not really knowing, you have to sort of guess. And I think there's been a lot of bad guesses, but I think that is true not just of the medical field, but it's been true of physics as well. Think about some of the simulations that have been done in terms of how fast the virus should spread. What the numbers should get to and so on. A lot of the estimates have been all over the place, meaning all these experts at calculating these things are getting very different results oftentimes. So there's maybe no consensus on how to accurately model the spread of disease. And now a lot of that is epidemiology, but there are actually a lot of physics researchers who do research in this type of area, because physicists tend to be expert on applying mathematics to real world problems. And this is a good example of that. There was just an example, a group in a physics group in Georgia that was basically making predictions about how the virus should spread in Georgia. And once the stay-at-home orders were relaxed, and they produced those estimates like mid-May to start in June, and their estimates have been way off. I mean, it's true that Georgia has had a surge like a lot of other places, but their estimates for how bad it would be are off the charts compared with what actually happened in Georgia. And this was trying to predict something that would only be a month or two ahead. I mean, the modeling has been horrible, even on the physics side. And so I'm not exactly sure, except that, and Adam and I have talked about this a little bit, a lot of the stuff about masks, which were at the start of it kind of poo-pooed and we were told not to wear masks, it just seemed like common sense. And in the end, the common sense idea of wear a mask was the right advice. And sometimes people are too smart for their own good, and they try to get too fancy with all their calculations and their lasers. And sometimes just good old-fashioned common sense does a better job, because it maybe contains the wisdom of ages that people have just gathered over the years, and there's something to that, I think.
So this is the conspiracy theorist in me coming out a little bit, but do you think that they did that on purpose, so there wasn't going to be like a run on masks, and so they were trying to save the medical professionals so that they would have the necessary PPE? I'm just speculating, but like it doesn't make sense. But I mean, you're right. Just logically, it's a respiratory pathogen. The mask would seem logically to help. And yet we were told initially, don't wear a mask. It's not going to make a difference.
So, I mean, Dr. Fauci, and I have a great deal of respect for him. Obviously, he's
I as well. Yeah,
the top infectious diseases doctor in the country. I mean, he did come out later and say, when people asked him about the whole mask thing and why the guidance changed, he basically did say, look, we were worried that we wouldn't have enough PPE for the medical professionals. And I mean, obviously, if everyone were running out and buying those same types of masks, that would be true. I think what was not fully appreciated is just how effective a simple handkerchief that's doubled over or quadrupled over can be.
That's a good point.
A simple homemade mask, how effective those are. You don't need to have the N95 or anything like that. So I think that was the part of it that people sort of missed out on in terms of the initial guidance. The other end of it is that, and this is still a problem. I mean, the World Health Organization, you know, their committee, I've read a fair amount about this and what they've been saying. Their committee has been strongly in favor of the idea that this is spread by large droplets that fall quickly. That's why they've been emphasizing 6 feet and emphasizing the so-called fomite transmission, because if it's mostly the large droplets that fall down quickly, then the place that offers the most risk is going to be the surfaces where those droplets fall. In reality, it appears that it's the smaller droplets that go farther that are actually the major cause, which is why the masks are so effective. But WHO has been very slow, that committee has been very slow to sort of recognize this issue. And so they were also extremely slow in recommending masks. So I think it wasn't just the fear that we wouldn't have enough PPE. I think it was also confusion about what the main pathways were, and sort of a kind of conservatism that said, you know, this is what has been effective with other diseases. We're going to go with this. You know, if fomite transmission has been an important thing, and I don't know, maybe for the flu or measles or whatever, I don't know. You know, it's likely to be the major thing for this as well. And so they just couldn't get out of their long gained knowledge, which just didn't apply very well in this case.
I think I want to add that, you know, I'm still getting my mindset around the fact that a regular mask is PPE. You know, in the beginning, it was no, an N95 is PPE. All these other masks are something different. You know, and now, yes, we know that. Okay, you do get that other protection from these other materials, and it doesn't have to be an N95. But I think that was kind of the early on was, you know, hey, we need these. If you're not wearing an N95, you're wearing nothing. So, you know, and it still makes me uncomfortable sometimes. You know, I feel that comfort when I have my N95 to see a patient as opposed to when I'm just wearing a regular mask.
And these are a lot more comfortable to wear, like just a surgical mask. A lot more. This is actually my favorite mask to lecture in because it's more lightweight. So when I'm talking a lot, it's not dragging down on my nose so much. I've worn some other ones that are like heavier weight, like cloth. And they actually, even though they're more comfy, like when you touch them during the course of a lecture, I personally found them to be more uncomfortable in the long run, and this to be more comfortable for like lecturing. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true to say that the effectiveness of masks has been surprising. I mean, when this originally blew up, I immediately ran out to get some masks and face covers and gloves, because the whole thing was, you know, protect your mouth and don't touch stuff, you know, fear of fomite transmission. You know, obviously getting the gloves was not as necessary. It's just as good and better, probably just to wash your hands. But yeah, I don't think any of us really realized, even those of us who from the beginning thought we should all be wearing masks, I don't think anyone really anticipated how effective the masks would be. It's just something you have to sort of learn about, I guess, from experience.
Okay, so this has been great. So thank you again, Brian, for joining us. So in the time remaining, we have about maybe 6-7 minutes left. I just wanted to go through a recent study that has come out. And so let me share. Can you see that? Okay, so this paper that came out, it made kind of a splash in the news. The title, Low-Cost Measurement of Face Mask Efficacy for Filtering Expelled Droplets During Speech. And this is from the senior researchers, Eric Westman. And so Brian, so I'm just gonna scroll down here. And so my understanding is they use some sort of like, was it like an iPhone-based method of like taking pictures or something? Can you kind of walk us through the experimental design on this?
Sure. So, oops. All right. For some reason, my camera's not detected. Anyway, I can speak anyway. So yeah, I mean, they have a dark box there with a hole in it so that people can speak into it, and they have a laser coming in from the side. Now, what they do, normally a laser beam is a very narrow beam or needle of light. But in this case, they spread it out in one direction. You can actually see that in the picture there, where it looks like it's forming a line. And so they're spreading the laser out in the vertical direction so that you have sort of a plane or a sheet of light, so that any particles that go through there that are large enough to reflect light back will be seen as they pass through the laser light. And so, you know, there's a limit on the size of particles. You can see if they're too small. If they're truly like small aerosols, you probably won't see them. But anything sort of in that a micron or larger probably can be observed pretty readily using this method. So you can get a wide range of particles this way.
And so we're looking at the particles. So the particles, Brian, are they going to? So I'm trying to get the right terminology. Are they like refracting, reflecting? Like what type of light are we seeing from the laser light?
Right. So these would be probably primarily reflections.
Reflection.
So what would happen is the light might travel into the droplet itself, and then it bounces off the inside surface of the droplet and comes back out again.
Okay.
So you get lots of reflections from the droplets, and you can count them based on how many specks of light you see.
Okay, cool. And then so Brian, so then moving down here, they have pictures of all these masks that they tried. So how did they hook up the mask to this apparatus?
As far as I know, they just had the person wearing it because they were doing this with someone speaking.
Okay.
So they would just put the mask on the person the way you would normally wear it, and then they would put their mouth with the mask up to the hole and speak into it.
Okay. And then can you just summarize, or are you prepared to summarize a little bit of what they found?
Sure. I mean, I think if you scroll down, I think they have a graph there. So the graph on the left, figure 3A, shows the different types of masks and how effective they were at cutting the droplets down. So if you had a value of 1 at the top, which you'll see the green data point there that says none, that corresponds to the full amount of particles that you get when you're not masked. And if you look at the one to the right that says neck gator, they found that neck gators are basically completely ineffective. They were no different than wearing nothing. But then as a bandana cuts about 50% of the particles out. That's good. But then when you get to the kinds of masks that we typically wear, which would be the ones that are labeled cotton, like cotton 2, which is number 7, and number 8, those are all down in that 10 to 20% range. So they're cutting the amount of particles down by, a factor of 5 to 10. So that's a huge reduction in the number of particles getting through the mask. So this is a test of the blocking capability of masks. How much do they stop the particles from getting through? And we can see that most masks that people would wear do a really good job, usually about a factor of 10 in cutting down the number who make it through, which also explains why it's helpful to wear it if you're healthy, because it will still, that same 10% blocking that it does if you're wearing it will also work if you're wearing it when you're sick, will also work if you're wearing it when you're healthy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense.
And then you can see the exceptional performance of the N95 is far on the left. I mean, that one's so close to 0, you can't even see it. It's less than 1%. So obviously that's very, very effective, but we don't need to be that effective to stop the pandemic. You just need to be effective enough so the reproductive number drops below 1, and virtually every mask will do that.
Right, that makes sense. And just to refresh everyone's memory, Josh and I had discussed that on our previous episode. The reproductive number is the average number of people that one infected person will infect. So if I'm infected and I go in a room or interact with people in my daily living, how many people on average am I going to infect with the reproductive number? And in order for the pandemic to fizzle out, that reproductive number has to be less than 1, right? If it's 1 or more, then that means that it's going to be sustained, and it has to be less than 1.
So just to mention one last study, there was a study of hamsters who were infected with COVID-19 versus healthy ones, and they had them in cages with fans blowing, and they put mask material on the cage with the sick hamsters, and it cut down the infection rate for the healthy ones by a factor of 4. So the healthy ones were 4 times less likely to get infected if the mask was on the sick cage. And then they did the same thing, putting it on the healthy cage, and that cut it down by a factor of 2. So, I mean, those effects should compound. And so if you have everyone wearing a mask, both sick and healthy, it should cut down the infection rate by a factor of 8. So if you think about a typical reproductive number for COVID-19 seems to be about 2.5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, about 2.
So if you divide that by 8, you're down to about 0.3, which is far, far, far below 1. So, you know, masks should have the effect of, I mean, it doesn't make the transmission go away immediately, but it has the effect of making it damp down steadily until it goes away. If people are wearing masks, you know, faithfully,
Right.
When they go out and interact with people.
And that number, Brian, might actually be an underestimate, because I mean, I'm envisioning this experimental setup, and I saw that study too, and you had brought it up the other day, and it's a cool one. But I mean, that's a really stiff challenge, right? That's a very harsh challenge. I mean, that fan is blowing that air constantly to the other cage, you know? That's a very stiff challenge.
Sure. Yeah, of course, the purpose of it was to simulate humans trying to breathe out, because
Right.
you are essentially trying to force some of those droplets through the mask as you breathe out. Or if you're healthy and trying to prevent breathing it in, obviously if they're on the mask, as you breathe in, you can suck them through the mask. So, you know, I think it was certainly, having the fan blow means that they were not underestimating what masks could do, because there's certainly, the wind blowing is probably going to be similar to or more than what would happen if you're breathing in or out. So I think, you know, again, masks are extremely effective, and probably more effective than stay-at-home orders, simply because stay-at-home also involves going out to do things. And we've seen that stay-at-home orders are pretty leaky. That is, people are still getting sick, and it's maintained at a pretty high level. Whereas, you know, masks make it fall down to a much lower level.
Yeah,
cut it out entirely. But I think masks are actually more effective than stay at home.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, people, and of course the economic impact of stay at home, if we could get people, you know, to work safely, to make a living and all those things, and, you know, keep our economy running, that would be ideal, you know. I feel like stay-at-home orders, the way it was initially done, and I get why it was done, because we didn't know a lot of things, a lot of unknowns, and we just wanted to try to stop transmission. But it was sort of like you know, cutting through something with a blunt knife. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not the best way to do it, but it's all we could do at the time, you know?
Sure.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously in the first go around, when you're not sure what to do, the first reaction is just to hole up in your place and try to stay safe. But I mean, it turns out that was probably not the best strategy. It was a good strategy, but not the best. But yeah, you know, we'll hopefully do better next time, because we'll know a lot more about it.
And the only other thing I had on my list to bring up just briefly is, so people are working in this, but I haven't seen anything published yet. And one of the reasons, so it's hard to work on the actual virus because it involves working in a high containment facility called the BSL-3. That's, you know, that's not the one like the spacesuit one where you see like in the movie Outbreak, but they are, you know, it's a special facility with special ventilation, special PPE people have to wear. They're very expensive, and not a lot of universities and colleges have one of these facilities, but you're not allowed to actually work on the virus in a lab unless you're in one of these BSL-3 facilities, which, as a quick side note, is so weird, because I could go out to probably Lowe's, right, and encounter the virus just out in nature, so to speak, you know, and you know, the world is not a BSL-3 facility. But anyway, just you know, in order to be approved to work with it experimentally, you need to have this special facility. Mm-hmm. But one of the data that I have not seen yet, and I've been looking for it, is when an infected person is speaking, coughing, whatever it might be, which droplets have the virus, and like sort of the relative distribution, right? I mean, I would love to know, and we still don't know, and that's why wearing masks is so important. But you know, an infected person, what is the relative abundance of each type of droplet, and where is the virus, right? Is the virus primarily on the large and not so much on the small, or vice versa, right? I haven't seen that data yet, and I think that's one thing that we really need to find out.
Sure. Well, you know, we did briefly. I mean, I agree that this is an open question and an important one. You and I had talked about it a little bit just in the hallway.
Yeah.
You know, I've said my opinion that I think this is simply a volume effect. So the virus is going to be uniformly distributed through the saliva, probably. So the amount of virus that you have is just going to be based on the volume of the droplet. So you absolutely get a lot more of it because of the bigger volume for those bigger droplets.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, there's the trade-off of having those smaller ones travel farther, and they're sneakier and they can sneak in. And if you breathe in enough of them, you can still get the dose equivalent of a large droplet. So
that's true. And so probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but indoor, like long-term indoor exposure, especially without masks, is probably driving the pandemic, right?
Yeah, that's probably a big issue. And, you know, when we saw that explosion in Florida and Texas and California and Arizona, you know, there had been a lot of talk of maybe when things get hot, you know, the virus wouldn't survive as well. And yet those places exploded just around the time when temperatures are really taking off in those places. It was probably people being driven inside because it was too hot, being inside with air conditioning, and you know that's where a lot of the transmission was probably occurring. So I suspect that was driven by people not wanting to be outdoors, because we know being outdoors is a very effective way to avoid it.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else? I mean, I think we covered a good amount. This is a very good discussion. Josh, did you have any follow-up?
No. Thank you, Brian, for joining us. It was great.
Sure, my pleasure. It was a good time, although talking about not so great topic.
Right. I wish we didn't have to have a pandemic to meet like this, but yeah. Brian, thank you again. Josh, good to see you. We'll set up another recording later in the month. Brian, again, thank you, and this is great. And this concludes episode number 9. All right. So this will go viral, hopefully.
Oh boy.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.